Hello, we're live. Welcome to the Against the Stream podcast, the podcast of the Revolutionary Communists International, where we take a weekly look of the events and news that are going on in the world and analyze them from a Marxist perspective. My name is Hamid. I'm here with Jorge Martin, and we are from the International Secretariat of the RCI. Today we have a series of very interesting topics to discuss. First of all, we'll be discussing the arrest warrant of the International Criminal Court for Benjamin Netanyahu and the consequences that this has, as well as the new ceasefire which has been announced in Lebanon between Lebanon and Israel, or rather between Israel and Hezbollah. And finally, we'll be talking about the emerging crisis, the economic, political, and social crisis that's developing in France. But let's start with this Netanyahu thing, Jorge. We saw last week an arrest warrant being issued by the International Criminal Court for Benjamin Netanyahu and his former Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant. And we're going to read out a bit of the indictment or the arrest, the warrant. And it goes as follows. The chamber therefore found reasonable grounds to believe that Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Gallant bear criminal responsibility for the war crime of starvation as a method of warfare. The chamber found that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the lack of food, water, electricity, and fuel, and specific medical supplies created conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of part of the civilian population in Gaza, which resulted in the death of civilians, including children, due to malnutrition and dehydration. On the basis of material presented by the prosecution covering the period between until 20th of May 2024, the chamber could not determine that all elements of crimes against humanity of extermination were met. However, the chamber did find that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the crime against humanity of murder was committed in relation to these victims. In addition, by intentionally limiting or preventing medical supplies and medicine from getting into Gaza, in particular anesthetics and anesthesia machines, the two individuals are also responsible for inflicting great suffering by means of inhumane acts on persons in need of treatment. Doctors were forced to operate on wounded persons and carry out amputations, including on children, without anesthetics, and or were forced to use inadequate and unsafe means to sedate patients, causing these persons extreme pain and suffering. This amounts to the crime against humanity of other inhumane acts. And there's lots more to take from, but let's just stop it here. Now, you had a comment about this whole question.
Yes, I mean the first thing to say is we already knew that Netanyahu is a war criminal, and the way they've been conducting the onslaught on Gaza is genocidal, with the specific intention of killing a large part of the population, including children. But obviously, one thing is to know it, and there's been a big millions of people know that this is a war crime. But it's one thing to know it. It's another thing for an actual court of justice, evidence be presented and meeting the legal limits, so that now an arrest warrant's been issued. It's also a bit peculiar, war crimes, isn't it? You can conduct a war, even if it's an imperialist war of aggression, but as long as you do it within certain limits, it's okay within international law. But in this case, it's quite clear that what the tribunal is saying is that the aim of this war is deliberately to cause, but let's say the killing of a large part of the population, including children, by starvation and causing severe pain by preventing anesthetics from coming in and a whole number of other things. So this has now met certain legal requirements, so that this has now resulted in an arrest warrant. This is quite serious.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, one thing is the standards of international law, which have dubious foundations, to put it mildly. We'll get to that. But the reality is what is actually taking place. Here you have Gaza was already one of the poorest areas on the planet. It was the most densely populated area on the planet. 2 million people enclosed really held as prisoners in a very, very, very small area. And the conditions were already barbaric before the war. But now what you have is a situation where I think it's about 90% of buildings have been damaged. Sorry, 60% of buildings have been damaged. 90% of the population, 1.89 million people have been displaced internally. 45,000 people have been reported killed by the ministry, by the health ministry. 11,000 more are missing. 104,000 have been injured. And there are, different NGOs, the Lancet and others, who say that the figures could be a lot higher.
Yes.
Because in these kind of conflicts, a lot of figures are unreported because people are basically stuck. Their bodies stuck under the rubble. The majority of the dead are women and children. In the civilian areas bombed, which is the majority of the places that are bombed, 44% of the victims are children. And there's other things. 64. Sorry, go ahead.
No. On top of this, there's been the deliberate targeting of journalists.
Yes.
Deliberate targeting of educational institutions, universities, schools,
hospitals,
and then hospitals, health facilities have been deliberately targeted.
The several attempts, or several times where they designated safe areas for people to flee to. They said, okay, you have to clear out this specific area, go here and here, in order to be safe. And then they've proceeded to bomb those particular areas. And it's clear, it's a reign of terror. That's what it is. And it's a war crime and a crime against humanity by any standards. By any standard, not just by bourgeois law, but by any standards. Now, the latest of this, the latest addition to this, you can say.
And this just to say that the court has been investigating evidence up until May this year. So this is to this you have to add another 6 months at least of the same, more of the same.
Yes, precisely. In the last 50 or some days, you've had the siege of northern Gaza, in fact, where up to 800,000 people are reported to be trapped. Some people say less, some people say more. Save the Children, I think it was yesterday or the day before that, issued a report saying that 130,000 children under the age of 10 are trapped in northern Gaza, where food and medical supplies are not coming through. I think it's barely out of, I think at one point, after 1 month, out of 41 convoys of supplies that was sent by the UN or by other emergency organizations, aid organizations, 4 of them got through, and those 4 were pillaged, were hindered in all sorts of ways. So in reality, nothing came through. Nothing came through. And now it's been 50 days, but it's also interesting to just stop by this point, say, do you remember 50 days ago what Joe Biden said?
Yeah, he said we're giving the Israelis 30 days to see whether the siege of Gaza is legal, is they are allowing food to come in and so on, and then otherwise or else we'll take serious measures.
Exactly. What happened to that?
Nothing happened.
Nothing has happened. Nothing has happened. Yeah. And the situation is worse than ever. I thought back then, still think, that was a trick for the elections. Yeah. It was just to give the Democrats a semblance of humanity, of caring before the elections. And they knew they weren't going to do anything about it.
No,
and the fact is, I think what we have to say is, Israel has rained tens of thousands of bombs over Gaza, and all of them, almost entirely, have been Western produced, as far as I know. Yeah. Supplied by the West, willingly, by Western companies. The planes that the Israelis use, F-35s and bombers, US made. And everyone knows that US weapons cannot be used anywhere in the world without US permission.
Yes, of course.
Because most of them are highly technological, they're linked into satellite and so on. They cannot function without US approval. Intelligence. We've seen British and American intelligence gathering planes hovering over Gaza while the Israelis were bombing it, basically designating targets looking for, any sign of resistance, any sign of anyone would try to resist, so they can bomb it down. The West is complicit, and we've been saying this. I think you wrote an article, if I'm not mistaken, this week. We published it on Marxist.com. I encourage everyone to read it. We said the West is just as complicit. It's not enough from our point of view that Netanyahu is put on trial.
Yes.
All of the leaders of the West should be put on trial.
Yeah, that's right. These crimes, if it's determined that these are war crimes, which we think they are, could not have been committed without the direct participation of Biden, Rishi Sunak, Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, Scholz, and the rest of them, because Israel, the Israeli war machine will grind to a halt 5 minutes after the West stops supporting it.
Yes, but the reaction, in fact, has been the opposite. Not only has there been a hue and cry to put everyone on trial who were implicated in this, but there's been a resistance to even carrying out this arrest warrant.
Yes.
The British were wavering. It's not really clear. Some say, they would probably arrest Netanyahu if he came to Britain. Some say they won't.
Starmer said, let's not talk about hypotheticals.
Yes.
Something like that.
Exactly, because an arrest of Netanyahu is a hypothetical for him. That's where he wants to leave it. France has said, yes, well, they accept the
jurisdiction,
warrant, but they can't arrest Netanyahu because because the ICC doesn't have jurisdiction in Israel. Germany has said they're not going to arrest. They've just been.
In fact, the case of France is worse, because originally the French foreign minister issued a statement saying, a vague statement, nothing specific, but they said yes, the France accepts its obligations because it's a signatory to the ICC convention. But then later on, Macron got an angry phone call from Biden and another one from Netanyahu, and they said, look, you cannot be a part of this ceasefire deal in Lebanon, which we'll talk about later, if you are threatening to arrest the head of state of Israel. So they told him to change their line, and yes, Macron changed his line, and now there's an official statement on the Foreign Affairs Ministry of France saying, yes, we accept our legal responsibility as part of the ICC, but since Israel is not part of the ICC, therefore Netanyahu has immunity from prosecution.
Yes.
Which is a rule they just made up.
Yeah.
And actually, in the same website, you can find a similar statement that they made when the ICC issued an arrest warrant for Putin over crimes in Ukraine. And in this statement, it says, yes, we will arrest him if he comes. So it's a clear case of double standards.
Exactly. I was going to make that point, because here you have, this is really something that's at the heart of this question is, a few years ago, when the war in Ukraine started, they mobilized the whole of the international legal system and everything else also, but that's another question, against Putin. He must be brought to trial for crimes against humanity. I think he was indicted for abduction of children. I think that was the charge against him, which I highly doubt, by the way. But that's another matter. But here you have the most clear-cut case. Back then, the West was going on about how Putin must be brought to justice and he must not be allowed to visit any country. In fact,
Putin has not visited South Africa and Brazil for international, G8 meeting or G20
and
meetings.
The BRICS meeting in South Africa.
The BRICS meeting, for fear of these countries executing the arrest warrant.
But now, when it's an ally of the West, oh no! This can't be. This can't be that now.
So this is the rules-based world order, isn't it? There are certain rules for our friends. There are certain rules for our enemies. Exactly. So it's two sets of rules.
Exactly. Now let's hear it from the horse's mouth, so to say. Yeah. Washington Post, one of the major newspapers in the U.S., owned by Jeff Bezos, by the way, but. The editorial has his own life, I think. But anyway, it's a mouthpiece of a specific wing of U.S. capitalism and U.S. imperialism. And the editorial writes, The International Criminal Court is not the venue to hold Israel to account.
Oh, so where?
Exactly. The ICC is needed to resolve war crimes in Russia, Sudan, and Myanmar. Targeting Israel makes that harder. That's the main point. And I'll read a little bit of, I've highlighted this bit, and in my note next to it, I've just written open mouth. That's because this is it's unbelievable that they write this stuff with a straight face to say, the ICC is putting the elected leaders of a democratic country with its own independent judiciary in the same category as dictators and authoritarians who kill with impunity. Israel went to war in response to Hamas's attack of October 7, 2023, which left 1,200 Israelis dead and another 250 taken hostage, around 100 of whom still remain captive. The ICC's arrest warrant for one of the authors of the massacre, Hamas leader Mohammed Deif, who was probably killed in an Israeli airstrike months ago, looks more like false equivalence than genuine balance. Mm-hmm. That's how they view this. Here you have these two people who have carried out what the whole world knows. Everyone knows this. It's like you're talking to a psychopath who's denying reality. They've been carrying out this onslaught against these defenseless Palestinians, and they are trying to make the case that, first of all, Israel is a democracy. It's human
But
rights.
can I just say that even from a legal point of view, even if you accept the point that Israel is acting in self-defense, which is not, still Israel will have to carry out any military operation following the rules of international law, isn't it? It should be, that doesn't mean that they can commit any war crimes that they want, which is what the court is saying.
According to their own laws.
Yeah,
this is the West laws. We didn't make the laws.
No.
The working class didn't make the laws. No, this is the West themselves.
Their own system.
And they've used it against plenty of people that they didn't like before. But now they have a clear-cut case of the worst crimes. What's going on in Gaza is a cold-blooded terror designed to kill as many people in the most horrible way possible in order to inflict as much harm in every way, physical, mental, and so on. That's what it's there for. And there's a reason for this, because they want the Palestinians to leave. They want to clear the way in order to take it themselves. That's one of the main reasons for this this whole thing. And yet, no, we can't put it up against, we can't compare it to Hamas, which is obviously a lot worse. And I mean, you can say a lot about Hamas, but they never drove 1.9 million people out of their homes.
That's true.
And they never killed tens of thousands of people in cold blood in order to terrorize them.
But the other thing in this editorial is, it's in this subheading that you just read.
Yeah.
The ICC is supposed to try crimes committed by Putin and third world dictators, not our friends.
Precisely. That's what it's about.
But the whole point about the ICC is that it pretends to be neutral and equal in implementing its law to everyone. But now they're saying now they're saying it openly. No, this was never meant to be like this. No, war criminals cannot be tried. If it's our war criminals, or you know what I mean?
Exactly. And that really shows the nature of the rules-based order that they talk about, the international rules-based order. And in reality also bourgeois law, because this is kind of the imposition of bourgeois law on an international basis. The rules-based order, that is the order which was imposed on the world in the post-Soviet world. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, you had the US as the sole superpower on the planet, and the institutions supported by US imperialism became omnipotent in a way, in terms of you had the WTO, you had the World Bank, you had IMF. You have these different criminal courts. You have all sorts of trade and diplomatic institutions, and they reflected their rule over the world. Reflected the balance of forces right then and there.
The domination of U.S. imperialism.
The total domination of U.S. imperialism. Russia was crushed militarily, economically, culturally. China was in a very backward situation at that point. Europe was under the total domination of America, and there was no one to challenge it.
In 1991, was it? No, 91, the first Gulf War was carried out with a UN Security Council mandate.
Yes.
With China abstaining and Russia voting in favor. So such was the dominance. That was the relations, the balance of forces at that time.
Precisely. But now that the balance of forces are changing, the mood in the West is changing. I mean, we'll get to this in a minute, but the mood in the West is changing. And they are starting, before these courts and these institutions, such as, you know, the domination of the dollar, for example, the SWIFT systems, the trade systems, and so on, they kind of functioned as according to the rules that were laid out. But now, because the balance of forces,
they were seen as neutral.
They were seen as neutral. They functioned. The rules were laid out, and they functioned because in the end you knew the Americans were always going to come out on top. But now that you have certain situations where these rules don't longer work, the Americans start to weaponize these things. So they weaponized the ICC against Putin. That's what happened. They weaponized the ICC against Putin on a very flimsy background, as wars go, you know. But now, in order to maintain its legitimacy, the ICC is forced to act. Otherwise, what's it worth? Everyone can see it. The whole world is seeing this criminal thing is happening in Gaza. No one is acting. Why is the ICC not doing anything? If they didn't act, they would lose relevance. But now that they do act, they come up against their masters. And
they're in an impossible situation. In fact, Gideon Rahman in the Financial Times, he was writing a long article, and it was pathetic because this is a liberal, right? One who actually believes there is such a thing as a rules-based world order. And he was saying the United States attacking the decision of the ICC is undermining the ICC. Yes, which is true. It's undermining the ICC, but he's kind of clinging back to a time when there was international law, and now it's all been destroyed. And
this is what the liberals don't understand. They think everything is a choice. But the point is, we got here through the crisis of capitalism, in essence. I also want to say, just one thing is that, you know, this editorial by the Washington Post was written by the editors, and the Washington Post there was a big bust-up between the editorial and the staff on the one hand, and Jeff Bezos, because they were saying we need to support Harris. These are, you know, dyed-in-the-wool liberals essentially, and this is the essence of liberalism. You know, it's all talking nicely about the rules-based order and humanity and this and that, but when it comes down in the last analysis, they always, of course, come down on the side of the system and the imperialist forces that they represent. Everyone talking about Trump being such a, you know, he's a vicious man. He's like Hitler. He's a fascist. He's this and that. But I mean, we'll see how Trump is going to act, and we'll take our, you know, we'll analyze that and we'll comment on it as it goes. But who was it who carried out these crimes against humanity? It wasn't Trump.
Under the watch of Biden.
It was with the collaboration of Biden. With the problem that Biden had was that there's elections. He didn't want to have this disrupt his elections, and therefore he was yapping and he was, it's not good that Netanyahu is doing it. He had no problems with doing it. In Ukraine, he had no problems destroying all of Ukraine. They have no problems starting one war after another, as long as it fits in their interests, of course.
And can I say that this ruling was never supposed to happen? I mean, first of all, South Africa wasn't supposed to bring the case to the ICC. And then secondly, the ICC was directly threatened, and the judges were directly threatened by the United States not to issue the arrest warrant. When there was the first talk about this, they said, don't do this, there's going to be consequences. And, well, I don't know why exactly, to their credit. I guess it's, as you said, to maintain the legitimacy of reputation of the institution, which they're part of.
I mean, they must also be full of lawyers who actually care about law and who think that
some of
law
them is possible,
actually neutral.
And they read the stuff and they can reach no other conclusion.
In fact, it's interesting because even though the U.S. is at the basis of all of these institutions, The U.S. has never signed onto the international criminal courts. Maybe you can talk about this.
That didn't.
You
stop
wrote
them.
about this in an article.
Yeah, but that didn't stop them using it against
Putin. No, of course not. Of course not.
But no, the not only the United States has never signed to the ICC, but they are afraid that the ICC can be at one point used against them. Because they are committing war crimes around the world all the time, imperialist war crimes. And so they were so worried about this that, was it in 2002, I think? Yeah. They issued a piece of legislation in the US, under Bush, And it's basically known as the Hague Invasion Act. Hague because The Hague is where this tribunal is based. And it basically says something like the US reserves the right to use military action. Yeah, you got the actual wording.
Yes. The new law authorizes... Oh, sorry, this is... sorry, I thought I had the actual...
It says something like this. Authorizes the use of all means, including and up to military action, to release any member of the US armed forces or any ally of the US that's been arrested under a warrant from the ICC.
And threateningly, it's called the Hague Invasion Act.
Yeah,
exactly. They reserve the right to invade Hague in case the court goes against the interests of...
so it couldn't be clearer.
It couldn't be.
There are rules. There are rules, but it doesn't apply to us.
Exactly, and this law was not changed under Obama, and it was not changed under Biden. That's the other. All this talk about the Republicans being the worst and this and that. Of course, there's not. Yes. It's just a question of a more smiling or less smiling mask carrying out essentially the same policies. Now. Yeah, as I said before, I think that this has a significance in the broader sense of it, in the sense that it is the undoing, the crisis of a post-Soviet world order. You know, a few years ago, when they started the war in Ukraine, they used the SWIFT system and the control of the US over the dollar against Russia. They froze $300 billion worth of Russian assets. They attacked them. They shut them out of the SWIFT system, which is a trading system, essentially. But what that did was that it actually undermined the trust in these institutions, which were quite important and necessary for the how do you say, smooth operation of world trade, because everyone now thinks twice before trusting, putting all of their eggs in the baskets of the United States, because what if they fall out with them in one day? They're going to use these things against them. And now they're using the courts and the international, how do you say, legal systems and diplomatic systems, twisting them their own ways. They defunded UNRWA, the UN
refugee agency for the Palestinians.
Agency, and so by weaponizing all of these institutions, their own institutions, which previously were allowed to function and were used by everyone and gave them a lot of influence, but by weaponizing them again and again to suit their very narrow immediate interests, they're actually undermining them. They're undermining the whole notion of the international community, the UN, the international law, and they're actually showing to the whole world, to the working class,
how it really works.
I think,
and that's why liberals like Gideon Rahman from the FT, from the Financial Times, he's crying over this. He says, "Oh, they are undermining the international institutions, and they shouldn't do that."
Exactly. This whole that's what this Gaza conflict has done. In fact, by pushing in the way that Netanyahu has, by its arrogant. It's a class thing, this arrogance, in essence. This brutal, one-sided war against the Palestinians.
With full ironclad backing from Biden.
He's exposed the whole system. He's exposed all the talk about democracy and human rights and, that we are different. The Europeans, the West are above. If anything, the West has shown to be below the rest of them. In particular, the Western ruling classes.
And so, as you said in the interview in GB News, the point is not so much whether Netanyahu should be arrested. Yes, he should be arrested. The point is that Starmer and Biden and Sunak and Macron and the rest should also be arrested. And add to the list Blair and Mandelson and Brown and all the other ones who are responsible for other war crimes by imperialism.
We can say it's like an example of the permanent revolution. If you want to carry out the bourgeois program of international law, you need to expropriate the whole ruling class and arrest them.
That's right.
Because they're all criminals. Okay, well, I think on that note, we'll continue to the next.
Well, maybe just one other point this is a big thing from the point of view of propaganda and public opinion and so on, exposing how the system really works. But as a matter of fact, it's very unlikely that Netanyahu is ever going to be arrested because the ICC doesn't have an armed wing that is going to carry out this arrest. And if the United States says, and Britain says, and France says, no, we're not going to arrest him, the ICC cannot do anything. So it's the toothless character of this institution as well.
But it will be one more brick in the revolutionary wave that's being built, and the process of revolution that's developing on a world scale. Let's continue then to, there's been developments between Lebanon and Israel, or Israel and Lebanon, if you want to take it like that. There has been a year of conflict, but over the past 2 months, this conflict has escalated. Israel has invaded parts of southern Lebanon. In the past year, the majority of these people, these figures are from the latest couple of months, but in the past year, Israel has killed 3,500 people in Lebanon at least.
Which is more than in the whole of the previous war, which ended in 2006.
Which was a direct war, yes. By bombing and killing. I don't have the numbers of the bombs, but I know it's in the thousands. They have they've carried out several terrorist attacks with the explosives in the Hezbollah pages and so on. More than 1 million people have been displaced. This is a small country with only 5 million inhabitants. 1 million people, mainly Shias, and the Shias are the poorest part of the population, living in very poor rural areas. 1 million people have been displaced from their homes. And in fact, it's very tragic because they didn't have many places to go, because Israel was targeting Shias specifically. So people were afraid to house Shias because they knew anyone who was a Shia could bring in more bombs, more attacks.
And at the beginning, the bombings were carried out against neighborhoods that were mostly Hezbollah supporting, right?
Yeah.
But now they had spread in the last few weeks. They had spread to other neighborhoods in Beirut, other areas of the country that have really nothing to do with Hezbollah. Not that the previous bombings were justified in any way, but it's now becoming completely indiscriminate bombing.
Precisely. So let's just, before we go into this, just to spell it out, Netanyahu didn't just have a war against Gaza. There was a war against the West Bank as well that we never heard about. There's a war against an invasion of southern Lebanon,
which is a sovereign country. Lebanon is a sovereign country.
According to international law, the West Bank has some sovereignty.
Yes.
But then they bombed Syria on several occasions. They bombed Iran. They carried out assassinations in Iran. They bombed Yemen. And they threatened anyone in the region with that the long arm of Israel can reach them all. So that's just to restate what they've done, the Israeli imperialists. But now there's a ceasefire. Do you want to go over the?
Yeah, the ceasefire was reached. When was it? Last night it was agreed. It was implemented this morning local time. It's a ceasefire that's been agreed between the government of Israel, the government of Lebanon, and the basic conditions of this ceasefire are very similar to the ceasefire in 2006. That is, Hezbollah is withdrawing to the north of the Litani River, is withdrawing from southern Lebanon, is withdrawing all its heavy weaponry and so on. Israel, within a space of 60 days, will withdraw from the south of Lebanon, from all the areas it has occupied, which is not a lot, but some of the areas around the border. Israel will stop its campaign of bombing and attacks in Lebanon. And then there's going to be an international mechanism for the supervision of this. The Lebanese army is going to come in and replace Hezbollah in the south of Lebanon. And then there's going to be an international mechanism for supervising this agreement, which is made up of UNIFIL, the United Nations Intervention Force for Lebanon, France, and the United States. This is the main parts of the agreement. But on top of this, there is a letter which is being kept secret, but one of the TV channels in Israel has published its main contents. The letter says that, in the actual agreement, Israel says that it reserves its right to self-defense, in many inverted commas, and that if Hezbollah breaks the agreement, they will come in and bomb or do whatever they want in self-defense, of course, within international law, and they will also inform the United States wherever possible. So it's full of caveats, and then there is this separate letter of guarantees by the United States to Israel that basically says that Israel can do whatever they want. They can invade Lebanon again, they can bomb Lebanon again, and the United States will fully back that. So yeah, I mean, it's a very peculiar situation. Yeah. But what is the meaning of this agreement? Well, first of all, this agreement is very weak and can break at any point. Yes. In fact, this morning, Israel again bombed the south of Lebanon. They said, there's been some reason for it. And
infractions.
They can always find an excuse to come and bomb again. But as I said, this agreement is extremely fragile, because at any time that Israel thinks or makes up an excuse to say that Hezbollah is building up its forces again or whatever, they will bomb. It's very unlikely that the Lebanese army can actually police the south of Lebanon. Lebanon is in a state of economic collapse, doesn't have money to maintain. The Lebanese have said this is going to be very difficult unless you give us some money. Perhaps the French will help, or I don't know. On top of this, there's the reconstruction of Lebanon. Who's going to pay for that? So the ceasefire is actually very fragile. But what pushed these two sides now to reach a ceasefire? That's the interesting question that we should analyze. And I will say the following. From the point of view of Israel, there are a number of factors. First, exhaustion, which everyone is talking about. Israel has been involved in a war on two fronts for 1 year, and for 1 month at least, an open war in Lebanon. And there has been the number of casualties on the Israeli side quite significant, and probably much more than they are officially reported. But that's only one side of the equation. Like, for instance, you can see that in the turn-up of reserve soldiers, reserve forces, when they are called up by the Israeli army, which used to be 100%, is now gone down to 85%, I think. So there's quite a lot of people who are called up to serve, defend the country in the face of this foreign invasion or whatever, the justification that they give, and they refuse. They simply don't turn up. Yeah. This is significant because it reveals
a country that's united.
That's right.
In war against.
Because it reveals the deep divisions inside Israeli society, the tiredness with this constant war, and also the fact that many people can realize that after 1 year of this war, they haven't achieved any of their war aims. They haven't released the hostages, and they haven't destroyed Hamas, certainly haven't destroyed Hezbollah. So that's another element, exhaustion. Also, the depletion of the Israeli stockpiles of weapons and ammunition, which is a significant factor, which was even admitted by Netanyahu. Yes. He said, well, we use this to replenish our stockpiles. But I think there's other factors as well. Obviously, the campaign wasn't as successful as anticipated, because it's very easy to bomb Lebanon from the air. Israel has the technological means supplied by the United States to do so, but it's much more difficult to actually carry a land invasion. And the land invasion had met with a lot of resistance.
I think if you look on the map, it's very few places that they actually advance more than 1 or 2 miles. Even.
Yeah, the day before the ceasefire, they took a picture of Israeli soldiers reaching the Litani River. But in fact, this is because there is one part
which is close to the border,
which is about 10 kilometers from the border in the let's say in the eastern part. So they took that as a saying, okay, we'll reach the river. But in fact, they haven't reached the river.
And those wouldn't have been convoys. That would have been small groups of reconnaissance.
No, that's right. So anyway, they found more resistance than what they anticipated because obviously Hezbollah is heavily entrenched in the area, defending its own country, national sovereignty, and they're going to fight to defend themselves. So that's another important factor that this war was not going very far. They were finding massive resistance, and this was creating exhaustion on the Israeli side. But I will say there's an additional very important factor, which is Trump.
Yes.
The election of Trump in the United States. Trump did say to Netanyahu before he was elected, "I want this war over before finish this war before I come into power." He didn't say you're not justified in doing so. He didn't say I'm against this war of aggression. He just said just finish the job before I come in because I don't want to have to deal with any wars. And so this was an important incentive or pressure on Netanyahu to reach some sort of deal, which has put him into a lot of trouble with his own electoral base and with the far-right madmen he has in his own cabinets, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, who voted against this. At least one of them voted against this at the Israeli Security Cabinet. So I think that's an important change in the situation. This is not just a fragile ceasefire. Yes, it is fragile, but I will say that the election of Trump is a big change in the situation worldwide and also in the Middle East.
I would say if the Israelis had continued from here, you can say this is the last off ramp, because they did strike blows against Hezbollah. I think actually Hassan Nasrallah, if I'm not mistaken, offered this ceasefire deal right in the first days of the invasion of the war, when the Israelis really started going for it. And then the same day they killed him. The Hezbollah was open to negotiating with them for whatever reasons. They're not interested in a full-scale war. But had it continued, it would have destroyed the economy of Lebanon. It would have destroyed Lebanese society in general, had a huge impact. But it wouldn't have destroyed Hezbollah. And that would have become, over time, a Vietnam, Afghanistan style of war that would have cost much, much more dearly to Israel than Israel. All of the things that you mentioned now, all of the little warning signs.
Multiplied by many times.
Including the economy, which has been severely hit by this war, by the way. So this was the last off ramp, you can say, but also for Trump, because what would it mean for the Americans if Israel, its closest ally, maybe anywhere in the world, was pulled into a grinding quagmire? Then they would have to participate somehow. They would need to defend that position, and that would mean dragging the U.S. into another. Obviously, that's what Netanyahu wanted.
And that's what Netanyahu wanted.
He didn't get that.
What he wanted was to bring Iran into the war with his constant provocations, and by Iran retaliating against Israel, then bringing the United States into a regional war on the side of Israel. That's what Netanyahu wanted. Why did he want that? Well, for one thing, he wants to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons, but for another thing, much closer to home, is he wants to maintain his political life. He wants to stay in power, and he knows that the only way to do that is to continue with one war or another war. So
until a victory is so big that everyone can...
While there is a war, he won't be tried. So that he didn't achieve, and certainly he will now try to present this as a victory. Say, okay, well, I pushed Hezbollah back, and now the people in the north that were displaced, Israelis in the north can be returned to their homes and so on. But this is not a victory by any stretch of imagination.
No. As you say, I think 64% of Israelis, probably for different reasons, don't see this as a victory. No. You have the far-right people seeing who want more. They want to expand the greater Israel all the way to I don't know which river, into Syria, into Iraq. And then there are those others.
The people who think that Netanyahu has gone too far already.
And I mean, just thinking about this before this program, I think we also had a discussion about it this morning. What is the basis of all of this? I mean, from Netanyahu's perspective, there's his personal ambitions and survival instinct, essentially. But there's also the question of Iran, which since the collapse, since the invasion of Iraq, Iran has emerged as the strongest power in the Middle East. Politically, their proxies and their allies have gained support, mass support, if not majority support, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, now in Yemen. They have huge support in the Gulf amongst the Shia population, in Bahrain, in Qatar, even in Saudi Arabia, actually.
In Gaza?
In Gaza now. This war has, before that, since the Syrian civil war, there was a split between the Shia and the Sunnis, the Arabs essentially and the Iranians, supported by the other Shia Arabs in the region. And this was a division pursued by the Saudis, by the Americans. This is, all of the rise of ISIS and all of these Islamic fundamentalist groups is a part of that. That's finished because they were seen, and Hezbollah was seen as the only ones standing up for Gaza. They're the only ones who supported Hamas, really supported them with arms, with money. Qatar also supported them, but Iran, I think, was the more important backer. And the fact is that there's a new political status quo in Iran. Now, we don't know how people are going to see this, but I think a lot of people will think at least they did something. They couldn't continue. They were hit pretty hard by these assassinations of the whole top leadership was taken out, maybe even another layer of leadership. There's quite a lot of, they were compromised through and through, but they fought for a year. They gave their lives, and they did what they could. Whereas the Arab leaders didn't do anything. The Jordanians didn't do anything. The Egyptian Al-Sisi in Egypt didn't do anything. The Gulf states didn't do anything. And what's the situation is that Iran is so popular that the Saudi crown prince has to receive the Iranian foreign minister with a smile and hugs and kisses, although we know that they hate them with a vengeance.
The Iranian foreign minister was also visiting his Jordanian counterpart not so long ago.
Exactly. He's been visiting the whole region, and he's been received with open arms. It's not because they like him. They hate him.
Yes, because they fear him.
They fear him. That's why.
Yes.
And that situation has not changed, first of all. The second thing is the Iranian nuclear abilities have not been curbed. And also, I lost my... Yes, in Israel, this is a big shift, in my opinion, in the consciousness of the Israeli masses, which is that there's always this idea that we are invincible, we are God's chosen people. This is the propaganda.
Official ideology.
We are God's chosen people. Nothing can happen to us. We have the most powerful technology. We have the biggest and baddest bombs and planes. We can kill anyone.
Air defense.
Air defense. David's sling and arrow, and I can't remember what all of these systems are called. We are invincible and untouchable. But that's all finished because they've had daily bombings of major cities. Tel Aviv just had like a rain of bombs hitting it. One of Netanyahu's homes was bombed. Several army military bases were bombed. Even in the middle of all this extreme situation, you had missiles from Gaza reaching them. Iran lobbed 180 ballistic missiles, and they did it with warnings and all, and nevertheless, a big amount of them actually hit. And so this is I don't think we've seen the full extent of this change in consciousness in the Israeli population. And at the same time, you had a situation...
And there's a massive split in the population now in Israel. There's another point that, for instance, some people are saying, okay, so Netanyahu can reach a ceasefire agreement with Hezbollah, which is still very powerful and has not been defeated, but why cannot then it reach a deal with Hamas, which has been much more, was weaker to start with, but it's been massively weakened by this campaign. Why can it not reach a campaign? And the reason is because Netanyahu doesn't really care about the hostages. In fact, the fact that Hamas has the hostages is in Netanyahu's interest. The minute the hostages are released,
The war is finished.
The war is finished, and he's going to be put on trial.
Yes, and there's a division that was there in Israel before all of this, which was leading to a serious social crisis, which is the division between far-right settlers and all the elements that Netanyahu bases himself on, who are, hyper-imperialist. Let's cleanse the whole of Israel. And then there's the other side who hate these guys, who are urban dwellers. Doesn't mean they're progressive or communist or anything like that, but they hate the far right. They hate the fundamentalist Jews, and they see that they don't have to go to military service, which is a law that was just pushed through, by the way, finally. And they are the ones who are carrying out, for whom Netanyahu is carrying out the war in Gaza, continuing it instead of getting the hostages home,
which endangers everyone.
Which endangers everyone, and not getting getting the hostages killed. So all of this has been held back by the war. That's what Netanyahu wanted this, because he could rally the nation behind him. But all of these fault lines, sooner or later, will come to the fore again, and with a vengeance, because now you also have the economic situation, which is not going to be solved anytime soon, and all of the other stuff that we've talked about. So watch this space is my thought, thinking about what's going to happen in Israel.
There's only one thing that I wanted to add that I'm not totally sure about. When you talk about how this is going to be seen from the point of view of Hezbollah, or there's an element that I think we will have to see how it's seen. That is that one thing that Israel has achieved with this ceasefire is the decoupling of the war in Lebanon with the war in Gaza.
Yes.
So Netanyahu has said this clearly, this is one of the things we've achieved. Now Hezbollah is quiet, it's not lobbing bombs at us anymore. Now we can deal with Gaza on its own.
Yeah.
And whether some people will see, of course, Hezbollah has arrived at this ceasefire under extreme duress, obviously, but whether this is going to be seen as abandoning the Palestinians or not, I'm not sure. What you say is true. Many people will say, well, at least they did something. But some people might say, you promised that
we're not going to stop.
That's right, that you were fighting this war in solidarity with Gaza. Gaza is still under attack, and you now had a unilateral ceasefire, let's put it this way. So it remains to be seen how this will be.
Yes, it remains to be like a lot more, because this is not the end of this process.
No, by any means.
There are things that are moving, and it's not under the control of any individuals. There are interests at stake, class interests at stake, and individual interests in the case of Netanyahu.
At the end of the day, just quickly, if you want to see what's behind all of this, is what you were saying before. Yeah. We've gone from a situation where there was one single superpower, the United States, one single imperialist superpower dominating the whole world, to a situation where the power of U.S. imperialism to dominate the world has receded. Only partially in relative terms, but it has receded, and there's a number of other imperialist powers on the rise. China, which has interests in the Middle East, and Russia, which has interest in Syria, is allied itself with Iran and the Houthis and so on. So in this realignment of the relative balance of forces of different imperialist powers, this is what creates all these wars, conflicts, and
revolutions. Trotsky once said that the struggle between form and content in the class struggle is what causes a revolution. You have a situation where a certain balance of forces leads to a certain legal and a political situation. A state is established, its legal basis is established.
And the balance of
forces
changes.
But then the balance of forces changes underneath the surface. And sooner or later, that will have a reflection, and that will be a violent one.
Yep.
And that's what we see on an international scale, as well as now. This is, I think, the perfect segue.
In France.
And in many other places, in a domestic place, directly on the form of the class struggle. Because we have now a government crisis in France. It seems to have been weathered, although it's not entirely sure. But basically, the Prime Minister of France, Michel Barnier, has proposed a budget with 60 billion euros in tax increases and spending cuts. 20 billion for tax increases. He says that is that the French bourgeois say is mainly on the richest, although I haven't studied these figures, so I would need to look a bit closer into it. But then 40 billion euros in spending cuts, which
social spending.
Social spending cuts, which undoubtedly will hit the working class and the poor the worst. Now, this has thrown the whole of the government in a crisis because
this is a government that has is just it's a Frankenstein government, isn't it? This is a whole number of pieces put together in order to get some sort of majority.
Precisely, it's basically for Macron and the wing that he represents to maintain power, and they made a deal with the National Rally, Le Pen's right wing,
which is not part of the government but gives it a parliamentary majority.
Exactly. The problem, however, is as much as Le Pen would like to support this government, Le Pen stood on the basis of
austerity, no attacks on the poor,
all of these kind of things, and has been under pressure. You told me.
There is a legal case against Marine Le Pen over embezzlement of funds in the European Union. It's a very murky case. She's probably guilty, but the reason why they're pushing this case is because they fear that the come new elections, the National Rally will win.
Will win, yes, precisely. But Le Pen would like to support this bill. However, given what she's promised, and given that anyone who signs up for this bill will be destroyed,
massively,
53% of French people.
No, 63% say that, 68% or something. They say they are against the budget.
Yes, and
53% will like the government to fall.
Precisely. So if you vote for what this government says, then you're going down with it. So that's a huge crisis. But all of this obviously is based in the economy. France has a massive deficit, 111% of GDP, and it's been going up. Last year,
massive debt.
Last year they believed that their budget deficit would reach 4 point some percent.
But in reality, it got up to 6%.
6.1%. So much higher than they.
This is just for context that the European Union rules, which came to prominence during the debt crisis last time around 10 years ago, 15 years ago, said that the debt, national debt, should not be higher. This is the Maastricht criteria for the European Union. The national debt should not be higher than 60% of GDP. This case is 112.
Yes.
And the deficit, the budget deficit, or every year the spending of the government the deficit should not be higher than 3% of GDP. This is already more than double.
They're only cutting 1%. They need to cut 3 times as much.
Yes.
Now, last year, under the previous government, they already cut 20 billion euros. Now they want to cut 60 billion euros. Le Pen has said that she won't sign it unless they make some concessions. One of them is not introducing a tax on electricity.
And the other one is to maintain the automatic increase in the pensions.
Yeah, which, I know that on the electricity one, Barnier has made a concession, which means that they can save 3.5 billion euros less. Where are they going to find the money for that for? I'm not sure about the pensions.
No, he's not made a concession on that. So he's trying to prevent the National Front the National Rally from voting against the budget.
Precisely.
It's very difficult to achieve. And if he manages to achieve that by making concessions, then he doesn't carry out the necessary budget cuts from the point of view of the capitalists, the investors, and the markets.
The problem they have is that all of this debt is rapidly unraveling. They are being downgraded now, which means that the interest rates are much higher. The interest rates on French bonds, although they're still relatively low compared to the worst situation, but they're one of the highest in Europe. In Europe, 2.48%. The highest difference between French and German bonds in a long time. And so the markets are reacting. The markets on the one hand are reacting because France can't pay back its debt and it needs to make cuts. And on the other hand, they're reacting because they don't have the political stability to actually carry out the counter reforms, the attacks that capitalism demands from them.
That's right. The ruling class in France needs a strong government.
Yeah.
And what it has now is the weakest government
the last thing
in decades.
Yes, precisely. Which is what? A reflection of the rising class struggle. That is what all of this in essence is. A reflection of a period where it's true, they haven't actually carried out the attacks that they needed to. That's why they've accrued, because the ruling class has been afraid, and because they've been making good money. They've been tunneling money into the system, printed money, debts, credit, all this kind of thing. But also because they were afraid of a reaction from the working class. But nevertheless, the conditions of the working class has been hollowed out. There's been enormous pressure on wages, on living standards. Unemployment has been sneaking up. Last quarter, 25,000 people lost their jobs. In the next period, they say that 150,000 industrial jobs, or jobs in general, but a lot of them in industry, are being cut.
There was one day, I think, on the 5th of November, that 4,000 job losses were announced in just one day.
Precisely.
From two factories. Was it
Michelin,
the tire factory, which destroyed 1,400, is it, or 1,900 jobs?
Yeah.
And then Auchan, the main supermarket chain, was cutting off also more than 2,000
Michelin
jobs.
is closing down two plants.
Factories.
ArcelorMittal, the world's biggest steel manufacturer, is closing down 2 plants. And there are many, many more. Essentially, the pressure is rising on the working class. At the same time as the government is cutting spending, is increasing, is trying to raise the pension age. It's and anger is rife everywhere. There's strikes. We're going to publish an article on Marxist.com. Again, I'll recommend everyone to read it. It's a very, very good article by one of our French comrades, which just lists out the different industries and sectors which are going on strike. On the 11th of December, the CGT, the left-wing union, has called for a national day of action.
The railway workers are going on an all-out strike in December.
Yes, they just went on strike last week, if I'm not mistaken. Unemployment is set to go up above 8%. And this is a massive turnaround. France is the heart of Europe, one of the highest living standards in the world in general. Generally, a welfare state, a good place to live. And you see a rapid turnaround, rapid economic erosion, following on also from what's happening in Germany with deindustrialization. Very quick.
Can I just say that also you can even trace this back a little bit more. There was this huge movement against the pension counter-reform, if you remember, with a series of escalating strikes, the threat of an all-out strike. And then the government, or Macron, was only able, previous government, was only able to carry out this pension counter-reform on the basis of 49.3 article, which is emergency powers. And that led finally to the downfall of that government. Then Macron decided to call early elections to get a proper working majority. And instead, what he got is an even weaker position. They couldn't create a government for months. And finally, they created this government, which is made of all sorts of bits and pieces, his own party, the Republicans, and bits and pieces from other parties. And this is the weakest government ever. So now, he will, if these parties vote against the budget, including the far right, then he will have to use again emergency powers, the Article 49.3, to pass it. And that gives the opposition the opportunity to bring a motion of no confidence and bring the government down.
That's what the whole thing has been about. I think I forgot to say it in the beginning that Barnier said he will use emergency powers, which is a law which allows you to push through a law essentially without having it on a vote by the prime minister, but that gives, as you say, the opportunity for the opposition to call a motion of no confidence. So what we're seeing here, and the interesting thing is the undermining of France has an advanced industrial economy, but nevertheless, the past years of COVID, of rising, of just piling up credit, pushing credit into the system, the Ukraine war, the rising competition from China. Chinese production, especially the auto industry, steel industry, all of these things are heavily influenced also by rise of Chinese companies and Chinese industry. And as a consequence of the general economic slowdown, falling demand. i.e. people are buying less. People feel they have less money on their hands, and they're buying less. And of course, cutting 40 billion into the spending will only add to that. That's not going to make demand go up. That's not going to make production go up. So what we're seeing is possibly the beginning of a downward spiral, and this could have major repercussions for all of Europe, not just in economic terms, but also in terms of the class struggle.
Well, I mean, we have just seen the collapse of the German government over a similar issue of the budget spending limits.
Yes.
And this is the situation.
And in a situation of deindustrialization again.
Situation that all European countries are facing, which is massive accumulation of debt, which someone has to pay.
Yes.
And the capitalist governments want the workers to pay for this crisis, which the workers are not quite prepared to do.
Precisely. I think what we're seeing is a gearing up for a next round of class struggle all over Europe.
Yes.
In Germany, unions are getting ready. In France, the unions are getting ready. In Spain, we've discussed, and we'll get back to this potentially next week or in the future.
Massive demonstration over housing.
Massive demonstrations. Everywhere, anger is rife. Just waiting for a focal point, just waiting for an outlet to break out.
And Britain is not outside of this process, because they just announced the closure of the Vauxhall van plant in Luton, loss of hundreds of jobs. It's a similar process.
It's the same everywhere. It's the same process that brought Trump to power, ironically, because of the lack, but nevertheless reflects enormous anger. And I think the
discrediting of all the bourgeois institutions and parties.
Everything, the bourgeois democracy, everything they talk about. We just talked about the impact that the Gaza war had. And all of them, they used to be seen as, revered, serious, educated people. But now everyone just sees them as crooks in suits, essentially, which is not far from the truth. So watch the space. Again, let's see what happens. We're going to follow it on this podcast and on our websites and on our other channels. But I would just finish up by saying, obviously, we're discussing, this is something that came up, a question from one of our listeners, why are we doing this? Why do we have this podcast? It could just be Jorge and myself sitting and talking, and that's very nice. I like that.
Not bad.
and having lots of reasons to read the news and make interesting observations about it. But that's not quite the reason. The reason why we are communists. And for us, the main thing is the class struggle, is preparing the forces of communism, the forces of revolution, for the future revolutionary explosions that we see are coming in France, in Spain, everywhere, in Britain. And we are building a revolutionary communist organization. However, in order to fight as revolutionaries, you need to understand who you're fighting against. Who are your enemies? And for that, you need to understand the mechanisms by which the capitalist system works, by which the class struggle develops. And that's why these things are important. In order to deepen, the deeper we understand this society, the better we can fight it. The better we can arm ourselves in the struggle against it.
Yeah, but this is not just an academic exercise that we want to understand how things work. Yeah, we want to understand things so that we can transform reality. That's what communism is about.
That's what it's about. The Revolutionary Communist International is an international revolutionary communist organization. If you didn't get that from the name. It's in the name. We have activities in more than 60 countries all over the world. I highly recommend, if you agree with our ideas, our analysis, even if it's not entirely, but you're interested in hearing more, to contact us on our website at marxist.com. You can also write in the comments under these videos or on Spotify, wherever you get it. You can write to us, and we will put you in touch with comrades who are operating in a country where you are, and if not, we'll help you set up an organization in your country. With those words, I think we can say goodbye, and we'll be back again next week, next Thursday, 3 p.m. UK time for all of those who follow us live. Otherwise, you find us on all the podcast channels, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever else you listen to your podcast. Thank you very much. See you next week.